this is in the beginning is the subject of the talk. And in the beginning means that in October 26, 1938, at the, what's called then Hanley Hospital in Santa Cruz, which was across the West Cliff Drive and looked out, there wasn't the big 10-story bring in then, to the wharf. And it was at 51 minutes after 7 o'clock in the evening, a child was born there. And that child was named Joseph John Ghio. And all those names meant something in that Joseph was my mother's father, who had passed away and I had never met, grandfather. And my John name was, there were a lot of John Ghios around. Well, it happened to be that was my father, and that's how the name came about. Now, naming irises does not done that way, but that's the way that was done. And from there, we lived about a half mile from there. And early on in my youth, and my youth was, I was 5 years old, for example. And my mother grew a lot of, she did vegetables. In those days, the mothers were housewives. Their job was to raise the kids, take care of them, do the dinner, do all the other work around. And that was the job. But she also had a passion for flowers. And as many people in that area, they had chicken coops because they raised chickens for the eggs and for food. And then against the garage, there was a rabbit hutch where we raised rabbits. And rabbits were not pets. They were there for the purpose of feeding the family. And that was fine, but then also, it seemed like most people in Santa Cruz at that time that I was somewhat later aware of, is that at the side of garages, people had nettings and they grew sweet peas. And sweet peas were quite an item because then you could pick the flowers and then they just kept growing up as long as you did it. And you had all these beautiful flowers that smelled good in the house. All right. My mother had a lot of, she enjoyed flowers too. And my mother's side of the family were the farmers who farmed Wilder Ranch. Well, probably most of you don't know what Wilder Ranch is, but Wilder Ranch is now a state park. And on that ranch, they grew they experimented with a lot of things that would make money growing there. They grew artichokes, they tried different other things, but the thing that ended up being the moneymaker was Brussels sprouts. And the market for Brussels sprouts is not in California. People didn't know what to do with Brussels sprouts in California. But the market for them was in the Midwest. They would ship in boxcars the Brussels sprouts that they had picked, and then they would spew the ice. And then it would go off to Chicago to the mercantile market there. And that's how they became rather well off in the end. But going back to the other thing is that my mother would, we're sort of a crossbreed in that my mother's side was one guys who grew the vegetables, where my father was a fisherman. And that was the life he led. And I early on could not stand fish. I just couldn't, I could not eat it. And they would make me, I couldn't get up unless I ate it, that kind of stuff. And I just couldn't do it. They finally gave up. And said, hell with you, and you just don't get anything to eat tonight. That was fine with me. at any rate, my mother would get a lot of like catalogs and flyers. And she had a passion for flowers in her own way. And one of the things she would buy it was Wayside Gardens. And they featured certain things, like she would buy the peonies. Well, peonies ends up not bloom very well in California, but didn't matter. And then she bought some other stuff, and in one of the things she bought undoubtedly from, and I'm not clear on this because I was kind of young at that time, some iris. And I don't recall anything about the irises going at the house we lived in at that time, except that we went to the ranch. The ranch is Wilder Ranch that I explained to you that they were farming. And all her brothers were there and so forth. In the ranch house, for some reason, when we were ready to move from Columbia Street to Bay Street, my mother took all the roses she had and then brought them to the ranch, Wilder Ranch, and then heeled them in. That apparently she was going to dig them up again and bring them to the new house. But for some reason, she also brought the iris there, 2 or 3 iris, and just plunked them in front of the ranch house. The ranch house was the first one, and so on. And I remember picking the one time that the irises bloomed there. And I brought them home and put them in some water, and I put them in there. I didn't know where to put them in the house, and I put them in the hallway. And my father, being the fisherman, often had to get up like even as early as 3 o'clock in the morning to go off to do fishing. And I had the flowers were there, and he told me to get them out of the house right now, because he couldn't stand the smell of them. And so I went, okay, so I put them outside and all of that. Well, then came a day, and it was in the spring, and my mother would buy the Flower Grower magazine. And in that, there would be different things. But then, as I looked through it, I got to the back, and they had the 100 best iris that were voted on, and they were listed. And they were voted on in the year before, actually, 1952, but it was in the 53 edition of the Flower Grower magazine. And I looked at it, and I was sort of, it was interesting. And then they featured the top 10. All right, from 6 to 10, they had black and white pictures of what that iris was. And that didn't do much for you. They had maybe a little sentence under it, what it was. But then they had the top 5. All right. Number 1 was something called Ola Kala. And Ola Kala was supposed to be a very bright yellow. Well, I had seen iris laying around different places, and all I had seen is the yellow was sort of a dirty thing, a dirty kind of color. But this one was supposed to be a really golden yellow. And that sort of piqued my attention. And then I go down to number 2. Number 2 on the list is blue sapphire. I'm sorry, wrong. Blue, no, I'm wrong. See, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm skipping. Blue shimmer, that's what it was. And blue shimmer was described as a placade. What in the hell is a placade? I had no idea, except that they then kind of described it. It had a ground color of white, and around the edges of the petals were little stitches of blue. Hence the name blue blue shimmer. And I thought that was interesting. I never knew there was such a thing. And then number 3 is on the list. Number 3 on the list is blue rhythm. And blue rhythm is described as a medium blue that grew very tall and with a whiting introduction who lived in Iowa. And this was supposed to be a very fabulous blue color. And well, that was sort of interesting because all I was aware of was this damn purple thing that grew all over the place, which we now know and call crimson king. Which bloomed any time, it blew in empty lots and all over the place. Well, that was interesting. Number 4 was sable. And I go, and it was described as like a purple. And I go, not a purple, what are they things? But this was supposed to be a blackish purple. It was supposed to be black. So, oh, a black flower. That's got to be something and a half too. And that interests me. And then finally we ended up with the piece de resistance. And what is it called? The pink cameo. And pink cameo is described as something that just I couldn't believe existed. It was a pink, and it was particularly called a flamingo pink. And I go, oh, this is really something. And I got a little excited about it. And then in the Flower Grower magazine, among other things, were little ads. And one of them, one of the ads that piqued my attention was from Schreiner's Gardens. And in it, it said that you could buy, they had a collection for $5. And in those days, I haven't seen this done anymore today, but they had columns. They had column A, and it would be 7 iris for $5. In column A, you could get 2 out of that. There maybe were 4 listed, and you could choose 2. Then there was the big column, which had more irises listed, like, I don't know, maybe it was 5. But there you could choose 3 of them from that column. And then there was a third column, which again, you could choose 2. And in that, you could make your selection, and that's what would cost $5. And I carefully did it, and I could get most of the irises in that top 10 list by buying them carefully, which I did. I told my mother, I said, you know, we can get these irises they talk about come in colors I don't know anything about. And for $5, we can have a collection and we can see if they really look that way. And she goes, no, I don't want any more of those things. If you want them, you go earn your $5 and you go buy it. Which I did. I went and cut my lawns and got my $5. And when I got my $5, I went like I knew what to do, to go to the drugstore up at the corner, had a little post office that sold stamps. And so I got my little stamp, and stamps then cost 3 whole cents to go in an envelope. And I remember buying, for Christmas card, you could buy cards, and they only cost, a postcard, and they only cost 2 cents. So it was, but I couldn't put I did a money order. That's what I got from them. I didn't put cash in there. I bought a money order. Well, then what happened after that, I mailed it, and within a short period of time comes a card that says, thank you for your order. It will be delivered in early July. Early July. Oh, that's fine. Well, then a few days go by, and then in the mail, I'm in high school then. In the mail comes a catalog. A whole big, beautiful, many-page catalog with big pictures, names on them, descriptions that were, nothing, much gorgeous stuff. Things I never imagined. What was hot in those days was brown iris. They were working to get really good brown iris. And they had pictures of those. And I just went, I gotta have more. But beyond that, there was, in the back of the Shriner's catalog, was something called the Hybridizer's Corner in the 1953 catalog. And the Hybridizer's Corner was written by Bob Shriner. And he would talk about what was in the works, what was out there that they didn't have yet to sell. And I was, it was fascinating. And even before that, there was a description of how you crossed them. I thought it was like I did when I was growing marigolds, was the first thing I did. And that was easy. I just got 2 flowers and spread them together. Well, I think the Irish were the same thing. You got 2 flowers and spread them together. But then I read that, and no, you don't do that. What you have to do is, and then he explained it in a little picture there. You got the anther, and then you brought it over to whatever you were going to put that pollen. There was a little stigmatic lip, and you had to push it onto that lip. You didn't put it on the underside of the lip, but it had to be on the upper side, where it was a little damp. And now I know how to cross them correctly. And so that's how I learned that. But also this Hybridizer's Corner, he was describing things that were in the works that were not yet something they had enough to sell, and such things as in the works was coming something from somebody called Paul Cook in Illinois, Indiana area. And there he was going to do, he had something called Deep Black was one variety, and Dark Boatman was another one. And they were supposed to be really big advancements in black, but they weren't on the market yet. And there was a lot of that. And then there was the thing about pinks in there, those flamingo pinks. And I learned there that something was described as, it was who was it? It was Fay, I guess, Orville Fay, was a good salesman. And he went and he had to get a name for them to describe it in a way that people couldn't resist it. And he went to somewhere, some guy, I don't recall the total story, but anyway, and gave him the idea to call them not just pink, but flamingo pink, which would sell much better than just pink. And of course, that became a big deal. And such things as later coolies would even just sell seedlings that weren't good enough, but they were pink. And you could buy a collection of seedlings that were pink. And so that was, one of the things that went on. Well, from there, now I'm really getting into it. And I'm not just happy with just a Shriner catalog. I look around and I see that if you send, I don't know if you have to pay money or not, but Cooley's had a big fancy catalog also. So I have to get that to see what that would like. And sure it comes in, and it had, one of the things was, I wanted to bring some of those catalogs with me, but they're up in the rafters of my barn, and I can't get up there to get a hold of them. But at any rate, if you open the Cooley catalog to the center, they have a picture of an iris that takes up both pages. And what is that? It's Elmore. And Elmore was something called an oncobrette. It was a cross between a bearded iris and a oncocyclus iris. And my mouth is getting dry, but and it was, it was so pretty impressive when you see something like this. It's 8 inches across and so forth. It's one you gotta have one day, soon. But that isn't good enough. And then there's another person we hear about, and it was Lloyd Austin, who's now the Secretary of Defense or something, but that's the same name. And he had a catalog also in Placer, and he was located in Placerville. And if you got that catalog, he did something called chromatic or something to the pictures. They were in color, but then he would do things like pull them up and spread them apart and do stuff with the color. And so it was very intriguing to see that as well. And when he, oh, that's good, thank you. It was very intriguing to see a green iris. It looked very green in his catalog. And it was called Green Pasture. And I was very intrigued by that. I go, oh, a green one. There's just a thing as a green flower. And I go, you know, I gotta have, he wanted $2 for it. Now remember, I bought the first one 65 cents was the price in that list I told you. This column was 65 cents, this column was 75 cents, and that column was $1. But then we selected and then we got the whole thing for $5. And I looked at that thing and I go, and then they were saying how difficult it is to get a green iris. And I said, well, I had taken art in junior high school. And I knew green, all you had to do is get blue and with a yellow and you mix them together and you got green. What idiot can't figure that out? And I go, well, I'll make a green iris. I just cross a yellow one with a green one, with a blue one. And, but anyway, I'll finish that. I couldn't stand it anymore, and finally in late August, I guess, I broke down and paid $2 for Green Pasture. I had to have it because I wanted to see what a green iris was. And, but before that, I mentioned to you my first order was with Shriners, and it said early July. Well, to me, early July was July the 1st. All right, and at that point, my aunt would bring me and my brother to the beach for a while, and then my mother would come back at 2 hours later and pick us up and so forth. And I was very anxious in early July, July the 1st, because I'm sure the iris were there. And of course, I get home, there's no iris. And I go, what's the matter here? They were supposed to come. It's early July. Well, then this went on. July the 2nd came, and no iris. July the 3rd came, no iris. What's the matter? They must have forgotten me. And I was ready to get out my 3-cent postcard and say, I think they've been misplaced. Then comes for July the 4th. Well, there's no mail that day anyway. And then comes July the 5th. And I'll be damned, if July the 5th they didn't show up. And I got all excited, tore the box open, and I found the experience I hadn't seen before. It had like sawdust in it. Well, it was really Excelsior. I never heard of that before. All right. And then I went through the whole box, and then they came out, and then they had one in there I didn't order, and it said, they had wooden tags on them, and it said gratis on it. And the gratis, what does gratis mean? They must have made a mistake. So I went to the dictionary and saw what gratis, it meant a gift. And oh, they give you a free one. And it was Phalanx. And Phalanx was, I guess it cost $2. And at that point, and I got all excited. Oh, you buy one, you buy a collection, they give you a free one. Well, that got me really going. So I made another order with Coolings, with that other picture on it. And I worked it, and their order was yet due. And I figured out, well, now let's see, if it costs $2 for $5, a $7.50 collection means I should get a $3 one free. And so I went through the catalog and said, let me figure out which is the $3 one that they're going to give me free. And I worked it out that it was going to be Rodeo. Rodeo was in the collection I got was Tifancha, was a yellow plicata, And this would be a variation of DeFonso. And I'll be going to hell when it didn't come. That's what the gratis one was in the Cooley catalog. Well, beyond that, then, them green pastures is bothering me a lot. I can't believe there's a green iris, and it's so simple to make a green iris. And I finally broke down not late in the summer, but probably beginning of August, and sent to Lloyd Austin $2. I don't know if I had to pay postage or not. And it eventually came, and to my surprise, I tore the thing open. There was no free one in there. It was just the one plant. What? Where's my free one? and then I said, well, I'm never going to order from him again, which I did. And so it goes. So I planted it in one special little place. And when we're going out, I'm going to school. I'm still in high school. And I remember coming, I saw the thing had developed. It had developed 3 stalks. And it had grown very well. And I came home, I came home a little in a hurry from school because it seemed to me it was going to bloom that day because it seemed to have a fat bud on it. And I'll be damned, when I got there was an open bloom. So it was the first iris I actually bought and bloomed. And I was all excited. Well, it wasn't really green, but it was sort of green. And it's sort of intriguing from that point of view, this sort of green iris. And by then I had also built in my head that I was going to cross them right away the next year, which would be the 1954. And it was easy, take the pollen and do all that stuff, and I was prepared for it. And so when they started blooming, I began crossing this one with that one, with that one, with that one, and I was young and stupid then. And I said, I can remember what the pod was, where the pod was on the stalk. Well, believe it or not, I could remember them. So that was there, but then I have a 5-year-old brother. All right, and he decides at some point in time, I was not around or something or other, and he picked some watermelons and brought them in the house to my mother. And he said, well, the watermelons are ripe. Well, what are the watermelons but the pods that are still green? Which nearly made me have a stroke and wanting to kill him right there. and so, what I did, it tells you, when you're really into stuff, I went back outside and I knew that each pod was sort of in a variety, was sort of had its own little trait. So I could sort of do that, and then I kind of replace the stalk, the pod, on where it belonged on the stalk. But of course it wouldn't stay there. But I knew that's what it was. And in my head, I knew I had what I had crossed with what to get that particular pod. This tells you how into it I'm absolutely not. And then that didn't work, so what I did is I kept it, and I had gotten milk cartons, in school. There were little half pints of milk, and I cut the bottoms off, and then put the pot in there with some water until it began splitting open. And that's how that developed. And so from there we go on, and it's just the beginning. Because this is the beginning that we just met you. And here we have now what happens after that. I did not keep any records of the first 2 years of crosses. But after the 2 years went by, that would have been 54 and 55, things had gotten a little elaborate. And I then decided at that point I had to put tags on. And the tags were the little, sales things and the wood, which I still use. And I wrote, what was cross with cross. I knew what to do at that time. And here you have the cross, the records of 70 years of hybridizer. And these are the crosses made each year. And the one that is actually in writing in 1954 is way down here at the beginning of all of these things. And it will be from then on, so this tells you what you have to do when you begin this. And here is the cross in type of the crosses made in 1956. Wow. So this is the first sheet of paper where I actually kept the record. And you will note that I made in 1956, whatever was the number that's on here. But one of the other things that occurred at that particular time was that it was something about ruffles in iris. And Shriners, again, had that hybridizer spawner I was talking to you about. And one of the comments were, if you got Snow Flurry and crossed it with Chivalry, you're sure to get something beautiful. And I didn't have a white iris in that first collection I bought, because if you've seen one white iris, you've seen them all. You don't need another one. And I didn't grow any white iris. And so I went through that, and one of the things that Shriner said that I mentioned earlier, and became my mantra for the rest of my life, was that you cross the best that's available to you with the best that's available to you. And that's my mantra to this day. That's what you do. And it may not be, the $25 one with the $25 one. It can be the $1 one with the $2 one, because that's the best available to you. And one of the things that said that if you, like I mentioned, that if you cross Snow Flurry with Chivalry, and Sidney B. Mitchell is another one that said that was the cross you make, you will get great things. And I thought, well, I'm supposed to cross the best available to me with the best available to me. And I said, well, Snow Flurry, everybody's using Snow Flurry. Why don't I try to use a white that somebody's not using? And at that time, something called New Snow was the top white on the symposium. And New Snow was a cross of Snow Flurry, not with Chivalry, but with Catherine Fay. And I go, oh, okay, well, that cost $1.50. But then there wasn't in any collection they had. So I go, well, $1.50, okay, I'll spend $1.50 to get New Snow, which I did, and it came, and fortunately that thing sent up 3 stalks as well. And I crossed, I got 3 pods of the cross of Chivalry with New Snow, not Snow Flurry. And then I planted them out like I did in my grandmother's backyard, all the seedlings I had. And there was a lot of those things. There were 80 different seedlings of that cross of New Snow with Chivalry. And at that time, I had just started San Jose State College. And I roomed in San Jose, but during the bloom month of, when was it? The middle of April through the middle of May, I commuted back and forth for the most part because I wanted to see my iris in bloom. And one of the moment, I remember this very distinctly. I went to the backyard, and there under the peach tree was one of the flowers blooming that was the cross of new snow with chivalry. And it was really beautiful, I thought. It seemed to be better than any of the other ones I had seen. It showed a little ruffle to it. And then the other most important thing it had was that snow fir was pollen. It wasn't pollen fertile, it had no pollen, but it was at seed. Whereas this one that was blooming there not only was beautiful to me, but also had an anther with pollen on it. So I could cross both ways. I could use it as the parent, seed parent, or as the pollen parent. So that opened up all kinds of stuff to me, but then it had this little ruffle on it. And I thought it was better than a lot of the stuff I had seen. Well, ultimately, in 1963, it gets named, and it is Frosted Starlight, which is the parent of my bubble ruffled material. And that's how that came about. And from there on, we go to a lot of different things, like I mentioned. And here is the other thing that you began doing, and it's this pile of paper. And what this is, it's something you do that I learned you do right at the beginning, or not at the beginning because you think you know everything then. And what it is, it's the description, the numbering of the seedlings you're saving. And in there, you will read, I have the number I gave them, and then a description of them, and then followed by what the pedigree is. And that is what all of this pile of paper is. And it goes back to 1958. I started on this one. So that's sort of the records that you do and sort of the path that you're taking and all of this. And then there comes a time when you're ready, you think you have your stuff, maybe you can sell it. And one of the problems was that at that point, if you were a commercial person, you couldn't enter a show, an Irish show. You could put on a display, but you couldn't enter the regular competition. And that bothered me because I liked entering shows. I had gotten good at it. The first time I ever went to a show was way back early on, when you got the 3A Motorland magazine, if you were got your insurance through them, and they had what events were coming up in the future. And among them, they would have shows listed. And one of the ones, at that time I started the Irish thing, and they mentioned that there were shows, and there was a show in San Jose on Lincoln Avenue in Willow Glen. And I thought, well, I'd really like to see what a show is like. Well, I didn't have an automobile. I only learned to drive because I had gotten a job working for the city in the work experience program in high school. And I could drive, but I didn't own a vehicle. But my parents did have a car, and it was a 52 Oldsmobile, with the back light with like a fire, and so it's kind of cool. And I told my father, I'd like to go see this show that they're having in San Jose this weekend. And he goes, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, then can I try the car over 17? I weighed 17. And he thought about it. And then he told me, well, if you do, you got to guarantee to me that you're only going to drive in that outside lane and you're not going to go any faster than da 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 da. And okay, yeah, I'll do that. And so I got there and I went into the show, and it's a Sunday. And I don't know what to expect. And I get in there and I go, and they had the best of show and all. And what was the best of show but something called voodoo, which was a brown pine sorghum iris. But the damn thing was, there was one little bloom there, and it was all sort of crinkled up. I said, this is the best one in all this show. But then I looked at other ones, and they were some more interesting, better ones than that around. Well, I didn't understand that, it was entered the day before, and how it is that day is what matters, not how it is the next day. And so I got, oh, well, okay, but, well, there's not many, at that point, like you look around now, younger people interested in this kind of stuff. But at any rate, a lot of old people, to me, were there, and they sort of had this thing of, see him, he's interested, don't let him get away. We need these young ones. And I remember asking, I said, I'm told that there's some growers somewhere around here in Willow Glen that grow iris and they sell them from their garden or something like that. Oh yeah, you're talking about the Reese Iris Garden. And yeah, that's just down Willow Street here, which is right where Bank America was. Oh, by the way, all the shows in those days were done in banks. They were not in other things like you have now, buildings like this. Not that they didn't have them, but the bank is where the shows, all shows of anything. And because they didn't, they weren't open on Saturday in those days, so it was free. At any rate, they told me there, and then you turn on the first street, Bird Avenue, you cross the railroad tracks, and Bird Avenue, you go down, and then you'll see a dead-end street. Well, that opposite that is where that Reese Garden is. And I go, oh, okay. Well, so I went down there and I did that, and I look, and it's full of cars parked in the street. And I go over there, and I go, okay, and I went down that street. Fortunately, there was a spot at the end I could park. And then I walk over there, and you go alongside the house. And then you went through an arbor, and then suddenly, breaking before you, is this bed surrounded by shrubs. And what that is, the Reese, Ruth Reese, Clara Reese was her sister, and Ruth Reese was her promoter, had irises growing and blooming that were these new things I was talking to you about, like dark boatman was there in bloom. These other fancy ones that were supposed to be on the market or about to be on. And I was amazed that already here we are. The ones I was reading about are here in person, real. And then you walk in the back and then rows and rows of irises, which they had older ladies there who would take orders. And then what you would do if you placed an order with them, they would be available, they would be put in a bag in July or something, and they were put under a tree and you were to come pick up your bag of iris if you had ordered them there. And so I didn't order any of them because it didn't make sense. I don't know, I just didn't do it. It was too expensive or something. I knew better ways to get it cheap. All right. It's my time. The other thing.
5 more minutes, Joe.
How much time have
Your time and the next person's time.
Okay. What went on after that is I then began entering the shows. And in those days, they were all color shows. In other words, you had like tall bearded, okay? There was like white. Then there was like cream. There was yellow, and so forth. There was about 15 classes of color. And what you could enter is one iris of that color in that class and that's it. You couldn't just put a lot of different ones, but just one per color. And, or type, placata, for example. You could have one placata, and that was it. There was nothing else to put in. And then they did have a few, they might have a couple others, like beardless, or three, or maybe short ones, something like that, and that's it. Those were your shows. And so that got me all excited, but what got me more excited was the fact that they offered an iris for every blue ribbon you got, a plant. And I thought, oh, I can get some iris for nothing. And so I got it pretty good. I was getting to the first ones I didn't really know too much what I was doing, but my first show that I entered at the Bank of America on Willow Street was, I got 2 seconds and a third, which are the ribbons I kept to this day. They were my first ribbons I ever won. Didn't matter there wasn't a blue one in there, it was that I did it. But the next one I learned, I saw how to do it. The next one I did win some blue ribbons, and I maybe got that far. And in it, then they came that I was going to get these free iris, and it would mention where I would have to go get them. I had to go get it from the one who was going to donate them. That's fine. They gave me the address and all. And so I just simply, the reliable postcard, 3-cent postcard, it wrote, I'm coming to pick up my iris on whatever the day was, July 4th or 5th or whatever it was, and I'll pick it up that day. And people didn't argue with it, they did. And then I would get there, and here things began happening. I go to Jack Craig's in Cupertino, and he was one that was donating, he had Golden Gladiator that Telemulis had put out for him. And that's the one he was donating. Well, then he brings me in and shows me everything he has. And then across in the hothouse, he has 9 jars of seed. And what is the seed but of the Pacific Coast iris that he had gotten originally from Sidney B. Mitchell, who he worked for, who was the head librarian of UC Berkeley, and he worked for the library, and Sidney B. Mitchell had given him the seeds, and he had them, and he said, would you like some? And I go, I really, in my head, go, I really don't want them. Because I see them growing wild along Highway 17, these squiggly little yellow things, sort of dirty, puffy color. But, you know, I mean, okay, give me some. And so he gave me 8 different little packages of them, which is something we meant to do for you, but then we forgot. And at any rate, I got them, and then I go later, I go, what am I going to do with these damn things? And I go, I don't want to use my good soil for them. And so what we had is pound coffee cans. And so I put some holes in the coffee can, and then just put some dirt in. And then I put the layer, and then I put dirt on top of the iris, and I shoved them against the wall, the patio wall we had in the shade. And then at least I planted them. And then to my surprise, come spring, whatever, February, March, these things grow like grass. The coffee can is full of seed, germinated. What am I going to do now? And I go, I'm not going to waste my soil on them. My other one, because I'm limited to what I, And so what I then decide to do is simply take the can, with the seed germinated, out of the can, dug a hole, and just stuck it in there all together. All right, well, that took care of that. And I just sort of ignored it. And then comes spring, some stalks come up. And then then they start blooming. And here I see something that is a clear yellow in one of those cans. And then there's over here comes another one, and it's sort of red. It's not that dirty old thing that's growing wild in the hill. And then so on comes this variation. Well, now I tell you, these are pretty nice. So that's where that began, because now I got those to deal with, and I began crossing them. And that becomes, then not only then I began going searching in the hills of Santa Cruz Mountains and back to see if I could find more green ones. And I happened to come across Paso Tiempo. Paso Tiempo is the golf course as you enter Santa Cruz. And if you go on Graham Hill Road, there was a side road there, and I go in there and I find a slew of them in purpley colored, but beautiful. The flowers were nice, and it was this small enclave. And it was so interesting to me that I wrote Lee Lenz, who was supposed to be a good expert down in Santa Ana Botanic Gardens, and I said I found this cluster of them that's different than anything else. And he wrote back and said, well, send me some blooms. And so I put it in a little bag and I sent it to him. And he said, well, what you found is a colony that had separated itself out from, what had happened is in the hills there were a lot of 3 different species that sort of intercrossed. But these sort of stayed uniform because they didn't mix with those other ones. And I had found a colony that was distinctive. And so I began thinking, okay, I'll cross those things. Well, that's how I got into this. And so pretty soon I'm beginning to expand out from them, and then you hear a lot of things and so forth. So that's how that part of the story got going in the beginning. And by then I'm really moving on into the crossing of everything, but I just show you an example of, I mentioned that I wanted to exhibit, and if I was an exhibitor, if I sold any iris, I no longer could enter a show. So what I did is I talked to the Johnsons. I was teaching in Hayward at that time, and they lived on B Street, which is just beyond downtown Hayward. And they had growing irises there for sale as well. And I got to know them, and then pretty soon we talked about it, and I said, well, can you introduce my iris? Then I can still enter it, because I'm not selling it. And they agreed to do that. So for my first 3 irises that were introduced, the Johnsons did it in 1963 for me, so I could continue to enter the show. But after that, it became clear I really couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't do it anymore that way, because if I was going to move ahead, I had to do it on my own. And so remember, I'm still teaching, and here is my first flyer of my introduction. It's a mimeographed copy with all kinds of descriptions and things I saw in the future, and this was my logo right here. So this is my very first catalog where I did and you notice this became my logo, the imitation iris. And so this is how that began. And my time is running out.
It's right. No, it's passed out.
And we got my 5 minutes to tie it together.
Your time is passed out. Another 5 minutes, and hopefully we'll move on to the auction of the iris.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to close it off now. And at any rate, from there we get fancier and fancier. And the catalog, and pretty soon you're doing all kinds of things like this. And it becomes a rather extensive business by that time. And by that time, we're also now not just doing, 20 crosses. We're now doing, my most number I ever did was 408 crosses that actually took and were planted and I was growing like 6,000 seedlings at a time. And then I should mention that there was a three sombrero sort of thing that, in those days we had the round robins I mentioned, you know, and we had a teen and 21, which were supposed to be the young ones that were teen or 20 years old. And that's how Keith Keppel, Glenn Cole, Cordo, and I sort of made our own Cavalier group together and began going to Irish things and all that sort of thing. And so from there we went to this, and that sort of is how it all began and how we are where we are today. I got to talk politics in that too, I did that.